Welcome to St Kilda Shul's Kabbalat Shabbat service. This week we read the parasha of Shlach, the story of the 12 spies who went to scout out the land of Israel so they could report back to the Jewish people before they entered the Promised Land. We know that 10 of the spies came back with a bad report. They wanted to stop the people going in. Only 2 spies, Yehoshua and Caleb, saw the beauty in the land and came back with a good report to encourage the people to enter the Promised Land. On their spy mission, they encountered giant fruits and giant people living in the land. The Torah tells us that 10 of the spies reported back from their mission and said, "The people who live in this land are such giants that we appeared to be like grasshoppers in their eyes." But the famous commentator Rashi tells us something slightly different. He says that the spies overheard the giant saying, "There are ants in the vineyard that look like people." This interpretation seems inconsistent. In the Torah, the spies describe themselves as feeling like grasshoppers when compared to the giants. But Rashi says the giants saw the spies looking like ants. So did the spies look like ants or grasshoppers? One novel explanation is as follows. The 10 spies and the 2 spies had different approaches to life. In the book of Proverbs, King Solomon advises a lazy person to go and observe the ant. The reason is that an ant spends the entire summer gathering kernels of wheat, barley, and beans. For their tiny size, they collect a staggering amount of surplus grain. Yet most type of ants only live for a few weeks, or maybe a month, or if they're lucky, 3 months, during which time the ant may only eat the total of maybe 1 kernel of grain. So why does the ant gather so much more food than it is capable of eating in its lifetime? The Midrash explains that the ant thinks to itself that maybe God will allow it to live a little bit longer and enjoy the food it's collected. The character of an ant is to prepare and save for the future. They represent those that have faith in Hashem and do good deeds now in this world to make themselves a better future in Olam Haba. Ants think positive. The grasshopper, however, is the opposite of the ant. The grasshopper, instead of saving its food for the future, is constantly involved in eating in the present. It jumps from place to place looking for food. It only thinks of the here and now. The 10 spies called themselves grasshoppers. They were focused on the present. They were worried about the big fruits and the giants. They did not think that the fact that God had got them this far, He would also help them in the future into the Promised Land. The 2 spies, who had faith in Hashem and knew what the future of the Jewish people was in the land of Israel, they were like the ants. They had faith and planned for the future. Let's take a message from the ants. Think positive and have faith. We don't always understand everything that goes on in our lives, but we know that Hashem is looking after us. We should always appreciate the good things that we do have and take the positive approach. Wishing you and your families a very good Shabbos. It is now my pleasure to hand over to Chazan Brett Kay, who will lead us in Kabbalat Shabbat.
Shalom everybody, welcome. Thank you very much, Rabbi Hillel, for your words of inspiration as always. Tonight we're going to be doing an abridged Kabbalat Shabbat service. We'll do some of the Psalms together, some of the readings together, and we will end with Lecha Dodi, because that's when officially after that Shabbat comes in, and obviously we can't use electronics anymore. So I'm going to be davening tonight from the Art Scroll Siddur, and I'm starting off on page 308 with Psalm 95, the psalm in which we welcome the Shabbat, the Chun Ranana. Lechun Ranana l'Adonai, Nari aletzur yeshayenu, Arba'im shana kudbedor, V'omar Adonai kol haaretz. Page 310. Yismichu Hashamayim etagel haaretz. Yirei hamayam umelo. Yalu sarai v'chol asher bo. Az yiranenu kol hatziyar. Lifnei Adonai kivo Paretz yishpod tevel betzedek ve'amim me'emunato Adonai munagel haaretz yizbechu im rabim. Bottom of page 310. Shomer nafshat chasidav miyad rishayim yatzileim or zarvalat tzadik ulishreilei simmechu tzadikim b'Adonai v'yodu lezecher kodesho. Page 312. Mizmor shiru l'Adonai shir chadash ki niflaot haaretz. Mi'arod imecha Yachad arim yiranenu lifnei Adonai kiva lishpot haaretz yishpot tevel v'tzedek ve'amim b'meisharim. Adonai Eloheinu ata nitam el nosei talayim v'nokei malalilotam romim Adonai Eloheinu ishtachol yar kodesho ikadosh Adonai Eloheinu mizmor leDavid. Page 214. Middle of the page. Kol Adonai echolel hayalot vayechsof yaro vayecholot kulam merkavod Adonai lama mul yashav vayeshel Adonai melech leolam Adonai sol yamo yitein Adonai yivorech et amo Page 314. Baruch Shem Kevod Malechuto Leolam Eved. Page 316. Let's sing together. לך דודי לקראת קלה, פני שבת נקבלה. לך דודי לקראת קלה, פני שבת נקבלה. שמור וזכור ודיבורך תשמיענו, אלא מיוחד אדוני אחד, או שמו אחד לשם ותפארת ולתהילה. לך דודי לקראת קלה, פני שבת נקבלה. לקראת שבת לכו ונלחקים מקור הברכה מראש מכרם נסוכה. סוף מעשה במחשבה תחילה. לך דודי לקראת קלה, פני שבת נקבלה. מקדש מלך עיר מלוך הקום בצעיר, תוך הפך רב לך שבט מעמק הבכה, והוא יחמול עלי חמלה. לך דודי לקראת קלה, פני שבת נקבלה. התנערי מעפרתו מלבשי בגרד, תפתח מעל יד בן ישי, בית הלחמי קורבה אל נשיגי עלי. לך דודי לקראת קלה, פני שבת נקבלה. התעוררי תתעוררי כי באורך, קומי אורי אורי אורי, שיר דבר כבוד אדוני עלייך נגלה. לך דודי לקראת קלה, פני שבת נקבלה. Page 318, second verse. לא 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 תבשי ולא תקל מממה, תשתוכחי ומתמי, ביחסו עניי עמי ונבנתה עיר אל תילה. לך דודי לקראת קלה, פני שבת נקבלה. Next verse. והיו יולים שיסה שובוסייך, ורחקו כל מבולייך, יסיס עלייך אל אלוהייך, כי משוש חתן קלה. לך דודי לקראת קלה, פני שבת נקבלה. ימין ושמאל תפאורוצי, ואת אדוני תריצי. היד ישפן פרצי, ונשמחה ונגילה. לך דודי לקראת קלה, פני שבת נקבלה. בואי ושלום עטרת פלה, גם בשמחה ובצלה, תוך אמוני עם סגולה. איי בואי חלה לך דודי לקראת קלה, פני שבת נקבלה. שבת שלום ומבורך. Have a great Shabbat, everybody.
Thank you again, Rabbi Hillel and Chazan Brett Kay, for the most inspiring words and beautiful singing that are keeping our congregation in touch each and every week. I wanted to share a very interesting insight with regard to the Torah portion this week, but more importantly, the way it actually relates to our lives. You see, there are many people within the religious fraternity and within the Jewish faith who take a view that in order to survive with our Jewish identity intact and in order to stave off the threat of assimilation, we need to cloister ourselves in our own little 4 cubits, in our own little environment, and isolate ourselves from the wider community. And I wanted to share an insight from the Torah portion this week, which I believe repudiates that notion and teaches us the importance of living as part of our society with our strong Jewish identity intact, but more importantly, to be able to actually influence our surroundings. Of course, we read this week the Torah portion of Shlach, which speaks about the infamous story of the spies. Moses sends 12 spies into the land of Canaan, which was to be renamed Israel after its conquering. And the question is raised that we all know the way the story ended up. The spies came back and 10 of the 12 did not give positive reports about the land of Israel. They said to the Jews, we won't be able to go in, we won't be able to defeat its current hosts, and therefore they threw cold water on the Jewish people's faith in God. So of course, 2 of the 12 spies defended the land of Israel and said, we can go in, we can conquer it, and Moses supported that view, and ultimately that's what eventuated. But the question that is asked is that these spies, the 10 of the 12 spies, which are depicted in quite unflattering terms in the Torah, were in fact initially not wicked at all. They were righteous. They were leaders of their generation. They were leaders of their tribes. So how did leaders make such a terrible and fatal error? And the answer that's given by the Kabbalists most profoundly is that their intentions were in fact entirely pure. The spies thought to themselves, look around us, we're currently living in the desert. We've got manna from heaven to feed us. We've got the well of the prophetess Miriam, and her merit gave water to the Jews in the desert miraculously. They've got the clouds of glory to look after them, protect them from the elements, clean their clothes, all of those things. The Jews didn't have much responsibilities in terms of looking after themselves physically, so they were able to devote all of their time spiritually to prayer and to study and to meditation, and they did that. The spies came along and thought, you know what, if we enter into the land of Israel, we're not going to have the manna from heaven anymore. We're not going to have the well of Miriam. We're not going to have the cloud of glory. We're going to have to start looking after ourselves. We're going to have to start fending for ourselves. We're going to have to till the earth, cultivate the land, plow, sow, harvest, reap, all of those things, which means that our time is going to be heavily dominated in turning the land of Israel into a habitable place, which means we will sever our relationship with God. We're going to minimize the amount of time that we spend studying Torah and prayer and immersed in meditation. The spies didn't want to go there. They wanted to remain in this spiritual oasis that they called the desert. And that was their intention. Their intentions were pure. Their intentions were to continue this incredible spiritual relationship with God, which was so unparalleled to anything the Jews had ever experienced before. That, of course, leads to the next question. What's so bad about that? Why were they considered wrong? Why did the spies go down in history as having made a terrible mistake? And the answer, as Moses explained and as our Kabbalists explain, is that the spies ultimately missed the point. We, unlike other religions, and all respect to them, which do live very ascetic lifestyles and divorce themselves from the physical world, and they go into the Himalayas and they're deep in meditation and they don't marry and they don't have families and they don't engage in the physical world at all, Judaism has always taken a very different approach. Our view is that God is not something to run to in the sense of running away from the world, but rather God is a presence that we should invite into the world, into our environment, into the world in which we live, into our families, into our societies, into our communities, into our schools, into our shuls, into our relationships, into our work life, into our social life. In every aspect of our lives, God is to be found in terms of the foods that we eat, in terms of the words that we utter, in terms of our business ethics, in terms of what goes on in every single facet of our lives. We need to invite God and spirituality into that existence. In other words, our role is to merge together, to marry the spiritual and the physical. We're not supposed to divorce the two and live runaway and ascetic forms of lifestyle. So that's what Moses was teaching, why the spies got it so wrong. It was important for the Jewish people, who, yes, did experience that spiritual high in the desert, to say goodbye to that. They got what they need in terms of their spiritual impetus, but it was time to say goodbye to the manna from heaven, goodbye to the well of Miriam, goodbye to the clouds of glory, enter the land of Israel, roll up their sleeves and start getting to work to bring the divine into the material existence. And I think that story, albeit 3,500 years old, is one that resonates even more so today. Because today we see that there are some who choose to live a very isolated life and choose not to engage in the wider community, even among our own Jewish people. And it is my view and my belief that, and I believe supported by this week's Torah portion, that we should necessarily engage in the world around us, that we should be involved in the sciences and in the medicine and in the arts and all of those things, but not as pursuits as end in themselves, but rather as a means to a further end. It is our role as Jews to try and be an Or LaGoyim, a light unto the nations, to try and be God's ambassadors in this world and to bring his message, the good word, the word of the Torah, into our day-to-day lives. And if we are able to do that and hold the torch of our Judaism strongly and proudly, then we will be impervious to those threats of assimilation and the threats of indecent exposures to the various negative elements that surround us. We can choose how to live our lives. We have the autonomy and the free choice to do so. We don't need to run away from our Judaism and immerse ourselves into the secular world, but we also don't need to run away from the secular world and immerse ourselves solely and exclusively in our religion and in our Judaism. Our role is to marry together both, to recognize that the same God that gave us religion and Torah and ritual also gave us the world in which we live, and he wants us to try and create a dwelling place for his divine presence in this physical world. Each of us individually and collectively is capable of doing that. And my wish to you, and I hope it's yours back to me, is that we will all be able to fulfill our potential in bringing that divine spark into the world to the best of our abilities. With that, I wish you and yours a wonderful Shabbat.